G'day and welcome to the Drive Able podcast, where we discuss all things about driving and safer community transport for people with disabilities and medical conditions. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you subscribe to our channel and follow us on the socials. Just search for Drive Able Podcast. We've heaps of content now and lots of interviews, so make sure you go back and listen to some of our older episodes.
Yeah, this is a really another exciting episode, Brad. I'm really excited for this one as well. Darrel Sparke we have on today. He's an amputee who is very active and living life well. And he's also working with Amputees New South Wales, who's an advocacy and support group. Daryl provides talks and support sort of groups around amputees and awareness around that, and has done a lot of work around supporting that community. He's in touch with a lot of people, and he's actually the person who introduced me to Khoa, who was our first interviewee. So yeah, are you ready to get this one underway, Brad?
Yeah, he's a chatty fella, so let's get him on.
Yeah, let's get him on. Sounds good.
Driving is something many take for granted, but when someone has altered ability, then driving or getting out and about in your own car can be challenging. Driving with a disability doesn't mean you have to drive an old clapped-out car with farm-like machinery, and relying on a wheelchair doesn't mean waiting for hours and then being in the back of a maxi access cab getting carsick. The Drivable podcast is designed to introduce and explore driving aids for people with disabilities, vehicle modifications, the NDIS, research, medical guidelines, driving techniques, and much, much more. The Drivable podcast is to help you be informed and be in control of your own independence so you can experience freedom through driving safely and reliably. I'm Ali, and with me is Brad, and together we have over 30 years of experience in disability and driving. Enough of the intros, let's get into it.
Okay, in this episode, we're talking with Darrel Sparke from Amputees New South Wales. Hey, Daryl, how's it going?
Good, Ali, yeah.
Welcome to the Drive Able podcast, and we want to kick it off by telling us a little about your disability or ability and how you came about it, and a little bit of background.
Thanks, Ali. No, look, it's great to be here with you guys. It's always nice to catch up with the quality gents. I'm an amputee, and I've been an amputee for over 45 years now. So I was a child amputee and acquired amputation through trauma. I had a bit of a run-in with a lawnmower when I was at school back in the mid-70s. Let's just say the school system was never the same again. And so obviously I'm a below-knee amputee. My trauma was localised just to my leg, apart from my personality, and it's been life-shaping, as many people in the disability space experience it. I'm a working man. I work 9 to 5 in a regular kind of job. I have 5 kids, beautiful wife, a dog, a rabbit, which is probably more dangerous than the dog. And when I'm not doing that, I'm a lover of sport. Things like the images behind me, where I've got some crew together for Disability Day to do some obstacle racing. And this one of my spare passions is I head up Amputees New South Wales.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And I might go back to those little childhood days, I guess. When that happened, you said it was in the 70s. So it happened at school, and do you recall it? Like, how old were you?
Oh, look, I was 5. It was actually, just to give you a bit of a stir, it was, see if this gets to get the juices flowing there. It was Friday the 13th, February 1976.
Wow.
Not that I'm setting the tone with dark images. I remember it vividly. It's one of those things etched to my mind and probably will stay there forever. Luckily, as a child, natural things take place, and obviously in such a trauma circumstance, basically shock kicks in and your body turns off a lot of your brain function, except the recording processes. Fairly horrific, obviously. I was in a little country town, a village really, at school, and I was playing with a cane hoop, for those who remember cane as hoops, and we will. And I just happened to step on a wet rock that the mower had been over already as I ran past the path of the mower, and I didn't actually get run over. I slipped underneath the mower
Yeah, okay.
And that was all she wrote. Now, the school itself was tiny. So we've only got, I think at the time we had 20 kids in the school in total from kindergarten through to year 6. So all in one building or one room, and a tight-knit community. So it had an impact not just on me, it had an impact on the kids around me who experienced that vision. The teacher was, unfortunately for him, new to the job. He'd only been in the job probably a month or so.
Wow.
And he picked me up and threw me on the front seat of the Hugh Brown Kingswood, which was a bench seat in those days, and rushed me straight to the nearest major centre, which was Orange. It's about 20 Ks. I was very lucky. If he hadn't have just dropped everything and run, I wouldn't be here today. The trauma did quite a lot of damage to me in the leg space, and I pretty much ran out of blood by the time I arrived at emergency. So it's quite a challenging memory, but I'm not negative about the memory. The hardest part for me was, it's kind of funny. I remember wanting to just let go and go to sleep and call it a day, even as a 5-year-old.
Wow.
But the most traumatic part for me was my dad. My brother jumped on the push bike and rode the 5Ks back to the family farm. Got mum and dad, and they zipped into town, obviously, to the trauma. And my dad held my hand. I couldn't hear anything. It's kind of like watching a movie where they see you move your body around and that sort of stuff, first person style. It was like that. But my dad holding my hand, I just watched him mouth, "Don't leave me, don't leave me." And that's always been the reason I stayed and didn't go to sleep. Was because I couldn't leave my dad. So, and that sort of stuck with me all these years. But it highlights the importance of family and support around those with disabilities to me, because it's our family that go through it with us. We're not alone in this process. They have to live the challenges, and sometimes for them, it's a point of helplessness, I guess, because there's only so much they can do.
It's come out quite a few times in this podcast journey how important family is. Mums get a pretty good rap. On this occasion, Dad's getting a rap, so that's good to hear from 3 bald blokes doing a podcast together at the moment. Family do amazing things in the disability side of the world, and support people through. We've had 16-year-olds with mums supporting them through the process of getting their license, through to hearing it over and over again.
You recognise that.
And I think licensing is a good one there, but you pointed out, Brad, too, because we grew up in a slightly different time. You guys might be a fraction younger than me, but and better looking. But I think I remember going for my license was a big deal, because as an amputee, you're challenged. Can I do this? Now, I'd learned to drive when I was about 7. On the family farm. So for machinery and stuff, to me was pretty common practice, and I'd been hooting around the farm in a paddock basher for quite some time. But then there was still that daunting element of going in to be assessed to drive. And back in those days, I was lucky. I was in another small town at the time, and it was the police officer, local cop shop you go to do your license, and they all knew me. So I was very, very lucky once more that they knew they could throw pretty much anything at me, and that I had an experience of adaptation and capacity that they recognised, which meant I got quite a lot of fair treatment in terms of showing what I could do.
Well, let's jump to that. Let's jump to that straight away. We've got a bit of feedback in this recording. I'm sorry for people listening, but your amputation is which leg?
That's my right leg. Yeah, so my throttle side. Leg.
Yeah, so your throttle. And do you use the same leg for the brake as well?
I do indeed. So there's an element of understanding. So in capacity terms for amputation, prosthetics technically is supposed to mitigate losses. So, but that has some caveats around it. Obviously, amputation, like anything, as a child, any 16-year-old who goes for their license, you need to have an understanding of response and feedback, and a sense of proprioception, knowing where your foot is and how much force you can apply at any time. Prosthetics can give that, but depending on your conditions, it may not be something that everybody's equally matched on.
Yeah, so you've got feeling in the end of your stump?
I've got good reception.
You got good reception through there. And we've spoken to Khoa, who
Yeah,
we know that you know him.
we know him well.
You introduced us to him back in the day, but we spoke to him about it as well in regards to it's not just for the OTs out there. It's not just the sense of what's in the end of the stump.
Mm.
You tune into many senses when you're in a car. Would that be true in your
Oh, look, yeah.
experience as well?
Yeah, Brad, definitely. I mean, certainly from my experience, when I've got a unique experience with concepts of proprioception because of my other curricular activities in terms of sport and martial arts and that sort of stuff, and from certainly the concept for OTs out there to understand is that the capacity element is something that needs to be demonstrated. Everybody's a little bit different, and Khoa in particular, his particular setup with osseointegration allows for a direct connection to his skeletal system, which allows for a whole different mechanism around response, whereas mine is perceptually through the epidermis or the skin of my stump and how that interacts with the rest of my body. But because of the way I've learned to listen to my prosthesis as it talks back, just like any shoe would, I get a great deal of depth of information that comes back about what I'm touching, what shape it is, how it moves, its responsiveness and elasticity, all that sort of stuff can come back through the prosthetic equally to anybody else.
So since you were young, back in the 5, 6, 7, did you always have a prosthetic then? Like, did anything change or like did it progress?
That's an interesting question. How do you attribute change as well to where we're at now? Back in the day when I first learned to drive, legs were basically made of fiberglass and a range of resin materials, and they still are to a degree depending on what leg you want. When I first started using prosthetic, they were made of wood, bit of fiberglass and rubber. Literally, my first foot, and I've got my first leg still. My first foot was older than I was. It was actually manufactured in the UK and shipped to Australia before I was born. And it's really rudimentary, but you still got a sense of information, provided you had good reception and nerve response in your residual limb, in your stump. You could get a fair bit back. But the technology and materials today allow for a greater reception.
So the amputation that you got at in the first place, that has not changed, and
no. We do have a component of being a child amputee. It's a complete opposite adult amputation. When you're a kid, they're worried about growth, and when you're an adult, you're worried about reduction. Yeah. So as a child, I did have revisions. It was a necessary feature of my growth. Obviously, bones don't grow at the same rate. So typically my fib would grow faster than my tibia, and I would often go back in for revision of that particular bone because it was actually pushing its way out of what remained of my body.
Oh wow! Right. So you're having revisions of your bones and not just the prosthetic.
No, that's right. Yeah, so you go in surgery to get you to line up again. Otherwise, you grow at such a different rate and it happens for most people. That's why we've got growing pains as kids. You know, our bones are growing faster than our body can keep up with, and it was not uncommon for me. I think my last revision was when I was about 13. And then unfortunately I didn't grow any taller. And that's, that in itself is a sense of trauma, but it does have an impact too on how your body responds to reception of feedback.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, does that then, so how many revisions did you have? And then did you have to kind of learn again? Like how was that process?
You kind of do. You kind of already got the good thing about being a child amputee is that you can adapt really quickly, and your neural system and your body is very plastic, I guess. And you're never going back to where you started and coming forward again. You've always got an advanced knowledge position. So, and I'm one of those kids who was really lucky that on the other side of each revision, I recovered it quite quickly, and therefore could move forward in that expanse. I think for me, the biggest thing that made a difference was just a good support. I was very lucky. I had a physiotherapist in that generation who was pretty much 40 years ahead of her time. And so I get the best of care in a small country town in a unique way. And that really set the tone for for everything going forward. But the changes to your body, you just kind of got used to the fact you'd have to go in and get revisions, and even prosthetics. 1 year I had 10 prosthetics made.
Oh, wow.
Because the rate of growth.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, was how do you keep up with those prosthetics? What happens with that? So you just got to keep getting them made. Basically.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, because they have such an impact on, they shape but contain you at the same time. They're not neutral in their behaviours. So and there's a coordinated number I would refer to around how it fits and how it applies itself to change you, a percentage. And once it drops below a particular percentage of conformance or fit to your residual limb, it no longer is constructive, it becomes destructive. So you've got to be on the cusp of change and constantly upgrading.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the differences with back in that day and that era compared to NDIS era now. Did you have to pay for those? How was that all funded? 10 revisions in a year.
Yeah, look, it's a lot, isn't it? And back in the day, it wasn't. And now my circumstances, obviously, my trauma happened at a particularly poignant place. Support structures were there because it happened at school. But back in the day, we were looked after by Veterans Affairs, because the veterans was where all the amputations were coming from. Although the rate of diabetes and vascular amputations were rapidly increasing in Australia. So I was lucky enough to be what was created on a sister scheme called the Free Limb Scheme. And Gough Whitlam, back in the day, decided all these people come back from Vietnam, the government decided that it shouldn't be that people should go without prosthetics. We live in a country, such a great country, we should be able to support each other. And prosthetics was one of those things. But technology was an unknown. We didn't know what it would cost and how much was involved in the future for prosthetics expenditure. So it was quite an interesting thing. Thinking back now, I mean, those who would be old enough to remember, a Tirana cost about $7,000. It probably still costs about $7,000 unless you've got a really good one and you get more for it today. But prosthetics, you can consider a prosthetic like that the cost of a car. And still is today.
It still is today, yeah.
I mean, now they're upwards of, some of them are upwards of 70, 80, 100 grand, if they're
Oh, yeah, easily. And it's all about how that impacts. And I guess with the NDIS is a great tool because it adds more benefit because they're looking holistically, which is really important. And that's the nature of the NDIS's objective set, is holistically, what does that mean? And amputees, a prosthetic isn't the end of the story. Like, if you got a prosthetic, that's not the end of it. Gravity's not our friend. So how you walk, how you hold yourself, how you use your prosthesis can shift the lower back, impact the shoulders, and have a long-term effect on your activity, and therefore what multi-morbidities you may develop as a result of that. And if you're an upper limb amputee, gravity is even less your friend because you're imbalanced by the weight of a bag of sugar on one side, and that can throw your body out rather quickly and make you wheelchair bound within a decade if you're not paying attention to it.
Never even thought about that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it can be quite debilitating not having symmetry.
Yeah, interesting.
Do you find, talking about back and talking about, because we did touch on this with Khoa a little bit as well, the rotation of his hips and the rotation of his thigh. Look, just a quick shout out while we're talking about Khoa. Poor fella.
Yes.
Has fractured his femur, I think it is, where his osseointegration goes in, and is in wheelchair for at least 6 weeks. He's making the most of it, mind you. That's Khoa. He's still living life to the full. I saw a video of him going down the main street. But a shout out to Khoa. He had a fall, fractured his femur, and is having to go through quite a bit of change at the moment while we're recording this. But Daryl, we were speaking, getting back to driving. Do you need to compensate more with your back to be able to, and do you feel niggles in your back when you're driving?
Like I said, I'm really lucky in a really small high percentage. Most people don't have the level of capacity and body resilience that I currently have. So being in my 50s, I'm getting a bit long in the tooth. But the important part for me is that symmetry allocation early in my life, getting for me. So I do, like everybody at my age, a long drive in the car has an impact. And you do have to work a little bit harder with your prosthetic because it works differently to, obviously the foot doesn't have, or the ankle doesn't have dorsiflex or plantarflex. It's a fixed angle. But the pedal on the floor doesn't care. You can be an octopus and push the pedal. Road rules, they're a little bit harder as an octopus, but the foot on the pedal on the floor requires a force vector. As long as I can produce a force vector with the same sensation and control mechanisms that you would with plantarflex, then I have exactly the same opportunity to drive. So for me, it's about understanding that. So I use my knee to propel or push forward to provide that vector, more than I would obviously my ankle because it doesn't move. And Khoa has and I've helped Khoa with driving. Khoa's got a fixed knee position through his micro-controlled knee, which allows him to push from his hip, which allows him again to deliver a force vector to control the pedal.
Do you find when you're pressing the pedal that you press more with most drivers when they're not using a prosthetic use the ball of their foot, their toes and the ball of their foot? Do you know which part of your prosthetic presses the pedal? I'm just to help for people that are thinking about driving with a prosthetic. I'm trying to explain it for them.
So it all depends a little bit with the contact point of your foot and your shoe on the pedal, depending on how your preferred adaptation is. So some people like to put their heel on the bottom, on the floor of the car, and push slightly forward from the knee and allowing the toes to come forward and the base of the foot to meet flat. Some people like to hold their leg on the throttle via the heel and foot itself. So it sits on the throttle and you control it as if you had a point contact with your finger. So you just keep moving it backwards and forward that way. Everybody's a little bit different depending on their strengths and their endurance, what's their stamina to do certain things. Ultimately, it's actually an easier exercise than walking because that requires a lot more activity. But people got to find their own niche, and the freedom to choose so is a really important one.
Do you have a bit of flexibility? Do you have a bit of flexibility in your ankle joint? Where the prosthetic is. Do you have a bit of carbon fiber or something like that where there's a little bit of flex in the ankle joint?
Yeah, look, innately, the foot I have now, which is very different to the foot I have when I started learning to drive, which had effectively no flexibility, and certainly the one I made out of steel for myself back in the 80s didn't have any flexibility either. But the modern ones have carbon fiber, do allow for distortion because that's part of the energy absorption and return behaviours of these feet. I have a high activity foot, so it does flex a little bit and is well worn, so it's a bit more flexible than probably would be straight off the manufacturer's production line. But it does give a little bit of give in that process. But otherwise, the ankle itself, which is aided within the curve of the carbon fiber, the ankle itself doesn't translate that to exactly the same. It's more like having a slightly different ball of the foot change rather than something like a whole foot movement.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for explaining that because I've been amazed with when somebody does come with a bit of flexibility in that ankle joint, whether it's a carbon type of scenario or something else. I'm not an expert when it comes to prosthetics at all. I have to put my hand up there, but when they push forward into the heel, they're able to get a little bit of flex into the toe, so a little bit of plantar flexion, which helps them get a little bit of fine control when they're changing from, let's say, 55 kilometers an hour to 58, 57, 59 kilometers an hour. They're able to control that little bit of movement.
And I think that's important to remember that driving, and I'm working with the NTC at the moment on a range of stuff around the assessing fitness to drive and the expansion into other authority policies around Australia. And one of the things that to point out, it's important to remember that there's a lot more going on in driving than just our feet. Sensory-wise, we pay attention with our inner ear, with our eyes, we're listening to the sound, we're getting feedback out of the vibration of the vehicle, as well as the pedal itself. If it was just the pedal, it probably would be way harder for everybody to drive than what it is holistically. And I think that's an important part of the feature. We're adapting on multiple fronts, even if it appears we're only adapting on one restricted place.
Yeah, that's a very important point that we've been, I guess, a lot of the people, the drivers have been really highlighting, it's not just, you know, when you lose one function, it's not that you're just trying to adapt that, everything else is adapting, and your whole kind of, the whole environment is adapting. So I've got a question about, so are you personally, are you on NDIS right now? I
am, yeah. So I'm actually just sent an email off to my LAC yesterday. Yeah.
So pre NDIS, and getting all of the, because I guess NDIS requires you to have, you know, therapists and all of that kind of stuff, sign off on stuff and bits and pieces like that. So pre NDIS, you didn't need that stuff. Did you have any of those supports and therapists and things like that back then? And what did you find the difference back then to now? Did you learn anything new, for example, or not?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I've probably learned more supporting other people with the NDIS planning and support structures than myself. But I think it's all a big part of the learning cycle. We didn't have much to do with occupational therapy at all. Amputees and occupational therapists can struggle a little bit because of the perceptions and the mental health space and around that particular demographic. And it's not a slight at occupational therapists or anybody else. It's just that we sit in a sort of funny bucket, don't we, Brad?
You can do it, Daryl. You can have a go at me. I don't mind. Go for it.
I love you, Brad. You know that. I think we had more to do with prosthetists, obviously, and physiotherapists in the line of our existence. Certainly, we often say that we're the experts in living with the amputation. That's because we are. Prosthetists don't live with it unless they're an amputee, and physios don't live with it unless they're an amputee, and OTs don't live with it unless they're an amputee. So we've got the most knowledge. It's just about the translation of other knowledges within the gap to augment what we're doing. So in the NDIS scheme of things, or before that, you know, cost was a big issue. There were prohibitors. You know, access to product was about whether you could afford to, and certainly government support structures in New South Wales are good, but and federally, but it wasn't the opportunity to be holistic in its support of our needs. As I said, physiotherapy for people is an important thing. Gait development and training and review of gait is really important. And they all contribute to whether you have social barriers, participation barriers. You know, somebody raised an issue the other day about a wet leg. And going, you know, being able to get to the beach and that sort of stuff. And this is where the children thing is a bit different to the adult thing. For an adult, a wet leg is about not falling over and breaking your hip, which is a hell of a lot more expensive than having a prosthetic. But for a child, to go to the beach with 2,000 other people is immensely emotionally challenging. The psychology behind being the only child, and I've been that child, who has to hop down or crawl down to the beach, 2,000 people will stop and see you. Not because you're an oddity, but because it's different. And that difference has an impact on your mental health. So having support structures holistically is really important. And those barriers will stop you getting on with life and being productive in society and contributing to your own good outcomes as well as society's.
Yeah. It takes me back. I was a swimmer when I was younger, and we had Nicole was her name, amputated at the hip at almost birth, and you know we treated her and pushed her in the pool when she was hopping into the pool and all kinds of mean stuff as kids do. But whenever we went to the next swimming carnival, she always attracted a crowd and people, you know, not knowing what to do. To help her out or not to help her out, or you know, how can we make your life easier or not easier, and all those type of things. So many questions whenever she went to the next carnival. And I can hear what you're saying from my experience, not living with it, but my experience of knowing somebody. Yeah, it does. I can imagine the mental challenge that would come every time you go somewhere new.
Yeah, and it's quite amazing. We all know that the deficits if you're inactive. And if we looked at leg or lower limb amputation compared to upper limb, and they're not dissimilar, but they have slightly different twists on it. The biggest cause of amputation in Australia is vascular diabetes. conditions. And the most important thing you need to do to overcome them is get moving. And it's really how to get moving if we take off a leg. So it's kind of its own anchor in many ways. So there's quite a lot of work that has to be done to break these barriers for people to get out and back, because that has an impact long term on everything, including the NDIS and national funding for these structures. But most importantly, it's not good for people if they're not getting out and enjoying life, like the gentleman behind me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, maybe we should switch into talking a little bit about Amputees New South Wales. You're a big advocate for that organisation. We've watched you talk and do a few talks on it as well, and done some work with you. So tell us a little bit about that and who they are and how you ended up there.
So Amputees New South Wales is one of the oldest community amputation organisations in Australia. It's obviously New South Wales based, but we work like all the amputee communities. We work across the country to support amputees, no matter where they are. We want to help everybody, and that's a natural thing. As an organisation, we're a member organisation, so we're invested in all the people in New South Wales, and it's important to recognise that there's 2,000 amputations in New South Wales every year. Now, that's quite a lot. And there's 8,000 across Australia. So that's one pretty much every hour if you just take an average. So there's a lot of people that need help. But we're an old school organisation in the sense that we're really grassroots. Individuals need help as much as anybody else or large groups. So we're focused on supporting them through peer engagement, because often if you're coming into the system as an amputee, it's a very daunting and scary thing, and you need people ahead of you in the chain to help you. But we also advocate within agencies and services like the NDIS for the right kind of outcomes. We kind of hold all that intrinsic knowledge about living with amputation, because there's only one way to discover this stuff, is to be thrown in the middle of it. And it's very hard to do on your own. So being there to support agencies and allied health teams understand the complexities of it, it benefits the whole community. So as an organisation, we feel very responsible towards supporting that. But we also like breaking those barriers of social inclusion down. So we get out and we do stuff like that stuff behind me. Out to archery, I've got some horse riding come up, some mountain biking, some e-biking. We're looking at technologies. We love bringing our allied health team with us as well, because so they can see us in action and learn some new stuff. We're working on some programs, as you and I both know, Ali, about driving further and education in that space, both for return to driving people and those who might be driving for the first time. So we're real about community building. That's the organisation's heart.
What kind of programs? Tell us a bit more about those programs.
So one of the things we recognised that it's really difficult to learn how to use proprioception if you're a new amputee, certainly in the lower limb space. So there aren't any safe structures really that people feel available to them. So we're looking at how we can create new programs, and Transport New South Wales is really supportive of us doing this, as established new programs so people can learn how to drive in a safe environment, obviously off the road, so they can pick up the skills, develop proprioception, and feel that they're included and allowed the opportunity to demonstrate the capacity when they actually return to driving licensed officially. Now, that's not just going to be obviously the return to drivers. There's also a whole fleet of youngsters coming through in the teenage years wanting to learn to drive, and there's also the misconceptions around what that means and how it works for them. So giving them the opportunity to develop skills like I did on a farm. We can't obviously stick a farm in the middle of Ryde, downtown Sydney, but as much as I'd like it, but there are opportunities that we can create so they can learn these skills in a fun and supportive way, but at the same time, bringing in New South Wales Transport, bringing in OTs like Brad and so forth, to get in there and help those kids and help those individuals, as well as learn about the process and capacity as well. Because that's the big thing for us. There's a bit of a gap between some of these knowledge points.
What's the licensing like for amputees? Like, what's your experiencing around that in terms of restrictions and?
Well, what's on your license, Daryl? Have you got a restriction on your license?
Look, it's a very interesting point. When I started driving, my amputation, technically, I would say, is not a disability. It's my superpower. So I, for the first 5 years, didn't put down I had a disability when I started driving, because I didn't. You had to keep pace with me. That's just how the universe worked. Now, it wasn't until later I thought, oh, maybe there's a requirement for me to do this, so I put it on. So the only license condition I have is must wear artificial leg.
Yep.
Now, because it's a bit hard to drive without it, obviously. So I always find it funny because it doesn't say where I have to wear it, just that I have to wear it. So
put it on your head.
Put it on my head if I want. But of course, no, I don't. But it has made for an interesting bar joke when I've been asked to, back in the days of showing my license, and they said, "So show us your leg," and I've asked them to fill it up. But I guess that can vary for a lot of reasons for a lot of people, and a lot of conditions. Some people, for example, who might have a low sensory response in their stump because of vascular disease may choose to go down the path of an adaptation in their vehicle and go to a left foot accelerator, in which case they're going to only drive automatic. Because it's a bit hard to drive manual in that circumstance. And people with an upper limb difference may have requirements to drive automatic in the same way, but for a slightly different reason, because obviously if they've got a transhumeral or above elbow amputation and no prosthetic to mitigate that feature, then they probably can't change gears on too readily. So an automatic is an appropriate thing. So conditions are appropriate, but it'll surprise you when you discover what people can do comfortably.
Yeah.
And given the opportunity to do so without any barriers is really important.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things I learned really quickly, certainly working with our youth programs.
Absolutely. And any OT listening to this, I challenge you to let them have a go, and you can be amazed.
Yeah, I mean that's a big theme of what we always say on this show. Get out there and try different things. So it's and don't limit yourself, and you'll be surprised what you can and can't do. So and actually one thing I noticed you say, which it reminded me actually of an experience I had, which was similar to the picture behind you. So you said something about left foot accelerator, and I'd like to hear your opinion about this. So I was doing a Spartan race myself like 4 or 5 years ago. And there was an amputee guy doing it. And I basically started running with him for about, 20 minutes, half an hour, and we were chatting. And then I told him how I work in this space and I, work in controls and disability driving products. And we were chatting, and then he was basically, it was really interesting because he was having a big whinge about how he said when he became an amputee, everybody told him, you just got to go get a left foot accelerator. That's what you should get, And then he ended up getting one and he hated it. And then he said he drove a car with hand controls, and he was like, I wish someone told me I could use hand controls because it's way easier for me, And he's like, I've always been struggling with these bloody left foot accelerator, but they just go, oh, well, you're an amputee, go get a left foot accelerator. So what do you think about that?
It's one of the things I've raised with the NTC just recently. It's like I said, it's my rule of thumb is the biggest problem in the community for amputation and limb difference about the concepts of capacity in driving relate to the lack of information. And it's not a lack of information because people aren't genuine. It's a lack of information because the community historically had a behavior of being very quiet and withdrawn, because it has a huge mental impact. I mean, a lot of people suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder because of the amputation surgery, not whatever condition was that caused it. So people retreat a little bit, and it's confronting. So when it comes to knowledge, we as a community nationally haven't done a good job at sharing that information proactively. So certainly from my perspective as a community leader, we're going back into universities, educating different allied disciplines about capacity and what we do and how that works. But so there's a bias, Ali, I guess, to follow suit previously taken. If you're missing a left leg, get in it. Right leg, get a left foot accelerator. If you're an above knee, you can't drive. You've got to do that. And the crux of this problem is that you've got to let people demonstrate capacity or ability, or give them the tools to develop it.
Yeah.
I've seen lots of people very disgruntled because they were told they had to have a left foot accelerator and not given the opportunity. Driving authorities say to us, hey, driving is a responsibility and it's a privilege. But we live in a society where it's not. We live in a society where it's a right. and it's a rite of passage. So you only have to look back at the 60s and 70s and earlier to see that driving was a rite of passage for young people, getting your license. So when it's stripped away and you're told you have to change your behaviour without evidence, and it is majority of time without evidence, then it creates a problem. The problem would be that most people get back into driving so early in their experience cycle as amputees, like right after getting out of hospital, that they haven't yet developed the skills.
Yeah.
So they get into left foot accelerators and a range of other stuff, and then discover later that they could do it with the right foot. And then they feel, well, a little bit angry towards occupational therapists because they were directed by an OT to do that. But not just them, even the driving authority service counter guys go, oh, you'll need this or you can't have that but it's not really how it works. And when you start to talk to the upper echelon of authorities like Transport New South Wales, you discover there's just a little bit of lack of information. So for me personally, as an individual with good experience, and most of the time, I've had a few funny ones, I'm invested in injecting that knowledge back in the system so we can dispel the rumours. There are plenty of people that are still going to need left foot accelerators and hand controls. And that's what I love about you guys with mobility engineering, is be able to get in there and try stuff, have a look and see all the conference work that you guys do. And Brad, you're great at getting people to try and look at different things. That's the opportunity. People need to discover what will suit them best.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So,
thank you very much, Daryl, for from your side, not our side. We keep spruiking it every week. We do this podcast to get out there and try stuff. It's our tagline at the end of this podcast. You'll hear it again a little bit later, but thank you for saying it from your point of view as well. And look, I'm just going to maybe push a few buttons with a few OTs when I say this. But the traditional OT assessment's based on 1 hour of experiment. And then we give our advice based on that.
Yeah.
It takes more than an hour to learn something, but then you might get to the end of an hour and then go, well, maybe let's try something else. And giving that opportunity to try more than just one option.
And look, there is an onus on OTs to meet a standard with the National Transport Commission and their local state authorities. There are some misconceptions about liability regarding that, because I've had those strong conversations with the authorities. And it's worth having conversations with your local community with amputation and limb difference, and even calling Ali and Brad, who've got great experience, for everybody listening out there, or make contact with me to understand more. There's such a wealth of information available through lived experience that can really help your clients so much more and understand their needs, because at the end of the day, they're going to look back and go, what did my OT give me? What did they help me with? How did they treat me? And how you are open to them and share with that opportunity to learn is going to have an imprint on them going forward for the rest of their days.
Yeah. That's interesting. So how did you end up with Amputees New South Wales? How did that end up happening?
Oh, look, I got involved in, I've always been involved in sport. So sports was my big thing, and obviously prosthetics and reaching the pinnacle, I guess, in martial arts as an amputee, certainly in the world, for my condition, meant that I kind of got a little bit of limelight somewhere along the line and ended up doing an ambassadorship with one of the manufacturers. And in the process, I started to see more and more people, because they are relatively hidden in society. They don't come out unless you are looking for them. And I discovered that I was kind of alone. Like there's great athletes in Australia with amputation. There's wonderful people I call my great friends today, but there's more people struggling dramatically with their condition who needed help. And I went, wow, this is horrendous. I'm an opportunity to do something. I need to do something. So I looked around at organisations to see what I could do and how that might work. And I came across the Amputee Association, or Amputees New South Wales, in one of its branches. And I discovered, while they were kind of old school, they had the most amazing capacity to just get in and decide to help people and make a difference. There weren't the barriers that I saw in modern foundations. There's just a genuine sense of, you know what, if we have to do that, then we go and do that and help that person, because that one person is worth everything. You know, their day, their life, their experience is so important. And by doing that, you build community at the same time. And I got invested because of that, with that passion is something I have, and I could see it there in the organisation, and an opportunity to do so much more than has been done in some time.
And how does it work with the organisation? One, how many people are like, I guess, volunteering or working? Is it something that like you are a member of? Like how does that work?
Yeah, so it's a member organisation. I'm a bit more liberal, I guess, in many ways, in sense of how it works. Historically, you would have thought of the community as pretty much just amputees, but we recognise everybody in the community as part of our community. We're not indivisible in any way or exclusive. We encourage health professionals and families to get involved, and we run activities so families can participate. In that image behind me, where's Wally is a dad of an amputee climbing up that wall there. Someone further up just is an amputee, and the two other people there are prosthetists climbing the wall as well, and some amputees about to climb the wall below them. So we get people involved in the community. So anybody can be involved in a volunteer organisation. So predominantly everybody is coming on board to do their part to help each other, and it's statewide. And if you're going to other states like Queensland, there's a Queensland equivalent to us in Victoria and Canberra and so on. So the premise for us is that community builds and supports community, and that's how we operate. So for me, it's an obvious thing. Get in and have a go. You know, a little bit might be sausage sizzle, or it could be a peer support volunteer helping someone who's distressed with the new changes in their life.
Yeah, sounds like a good organisation.
Daryl, we haven't even spoken about the martial arts side of it all. Do you want to just give a really quick history into, because you've mentioned it a couple of times. I want to give you time to explain that, because I want to know a little bit more about that side of, or that part of your life.
I guess as a high school kid growing up, ninjas were the popular fashion, and everybody wanted to be a ninja or a turtle, maybe a turtle ninja at the same time. And when I hit university, I was invited by one of my friends, because I was also a tennis player and a hockey player and that sort of stuff, and said, look, I want to go to this thing called Taekwondo. And I went, I want to be a ninja. Why would you want to do Taekwondo? But okay, I'll come along and hold your hand. So I went along, I fell in love with the sport instantly the very first night. 8 months later, I was the president of the university club at Newcastle, stayed the president for 7 years, became the instructor of the club 4 years after I started, and still the head coach of the club ever since. I work on the Australian Para Committee for Taekwondo Australia, and I'm a 4th Dan Master Instructor for Taekwondo. And along the way, I learned a lot, like understanding how to really use my prosthetics effectively, understanding body mechanics. My knowledge has grown dramatically, balance, posture, the physics of it all. And often I find myself in my classes educating allied health teams of undergraduates training with me to learn about not just about prosthetics, but learn about body mechanics and behavior. So I kind of reached the point where I actually got to the point where I could have like, well, let's go to the Olympics, except there's no class for me because it's unique in the world. So I kind of reached the top a bit early before I could build anything, but I love it. And I still train with 20-year-olds today, and they've still got to keep up with me.
That's good.
Yeah.
You run as well, don't you? Is that right?
I do. I've actually torn my hamstring on my good leg at the moment, so I'm letting it recover. I enjoy a good run. I've done a few half marathons and that sort of stuff, and I look forward to getting out and do more events, because running back in the old days came at a price when the technology was different and the suspension types were different. We didn't have silicon-based liners like we do today. And a run, I remember when I was 14, I ran high school cross country, and it was run on a woolen sock. And when I got to the end of the cross country, I took my leg off because it just hurt too much, and I poured the blood out of my socket, and I didn't walk for 3 weeks. Wow. And that was the price you paid in the day to just get in and have a go. And sometimes that happens still, not so much the pouring the blood out of the bottom of the socket, but you still have injuries and stuff. And so prosthetics are really vital, and the quality of prosthetics has an impact. But running is a lot of fun. I love doing sports, obviously. For me, it's a great motivator, and it's kind of my medicine.
That's really cool.
Hey, you're a great guy to talk to, Daryl. We've probably got to we could probably talk for another hour or so about taekwondo, about running, but this is a driving podcast.
Yep.
So thank you very much for sharing it. We have this one question that we finish everything off. I think we've primed you for it. What's the final question that we ask everybody is that driving is more than getting from A to B. What's something that you use your car for or have used your car for in the past that means so much to you that other people mightn't know about?
Well, it's really hard. I'm a country boy, obviously, so there's probably a lot of things I shouldn't mention I've used my car for. Um, and it's hard to think of something in particular. I mean, I grew up in a car called a Hillman Hunter, and only those old enough to know that the Hillman Hunter was a strong, solid car of its era, and it had the best chromium bumpers in the business. And I remember, but it had the softest steering arms of iron you could get, and you could bend it with a finger. And I remember felling a tree once by accident coming down a hill because I bent the steering arms, the wheels went out and I hit a tree. The chromium bumper didn't even flinch, but the tree fell down and it was a tree. So, but I think one of the things that's most interesting, when I got my first car, still being a country boy, we used to obviously go spotlighting and shooting foxes and that sort of stuff. And I remember taking my car basically through a swamp and with a mate spotlighting in a friend's property. And literally, we sat on the windowsills and we drove, and I actually have a prosthetic on the floor, pushing it with my normal foot from the socket while I sat on the windowsill with a spotlight driving across this swampy paddock while my mate was shooting out the other window. And I thought to myself, there is no way anybody else would be doing this ridiculous thing in this car. But the car did it, and we had a fantastic time, and I relish every moment of that insanity.
Good on you, Daryl. Thank you very much.
That was awesome.
Yeah, a huge thank you to you. Hey, if people wanted to reach out to you or Amputees New South Wales, how can they do that? Where's the best place to find you? We'll share some details as well in this podcast in the show notes, but where's the best place for people to reach you if they're just listening in?
Oh, look, the best place is to jump on, obviously, through the website, amputeesnewsouthwales.org.au. We have an 1800 number to make contact, and you can also find us on Facebook. That's perhaps the easiest way. I'm a hands-on kind of guy, so at the top of the chain, if people make a call or send an email, you're going to get the top of the tree and get involved. So that's really the simplest way. Drop a line, give us a call. Any question, any thoughts, any support, we're here. Just reach out.
Yeah, no, I'll give these guys a plug. I'll give Daryl a plug. We've worked with him, and they're very helpful and they're really passionate. So honestly, even if, as he said, even if you're a allied health professional or anyone needing some help or questions, call and ask, because they're more than willing to help, and I think it'll be of benefit anyway. So
yeah, if you're a driver trained OT, reach out and ask questions. Don't guess. Ask questions and learn more about this space, because yeah, like Daryl said, you don't just need a left foot accelerator if you've had a right amputation. There's lots of options out there. And when it comes to upper limbs, lower limbs, left, right, multiple, there's options out there to experiment with. And somebody with lived experience like Daryl, we thank you very much for sharing your journey and being open to discuss things with driver trained OTs, but anybody with an amputation or anybody else that needs more information.
Yeah, no, look, and thank you guys. To everybody listening, there's no question that you're talking to two of the best experts in the business with Al and Brad, and I appreciate you guys giving me the chance to have a chat. And it's good to see so many shiny foreheads.
yes. Tune into the YouTube channel if you want to see some glare. Yeah. All right. Look, for people listening in, hang around. We're going to, Ali and I, break down this interview into some important pieces of information for people specific about driving. But if you can't hang around, as we say in every episode, if you've got any queries about what you can do and what will work for you, get in contact with your local OT or mobility dealer and set yourself up with a trial. I think we've highlighted that enough today. Trials really do put you in the driver's seat. See you in the next episode, everyone.
Thanks, Daryl.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, so that was a great interview there, Brad. So now we're going to do the follow-up, just I guess the little breakdown. And to kick it off, I might just highlight one of the points I've got here, which was the first point, which it was really great to hear Daryl highlight the whole point of family and supports and people around you. You know, it was great that he sort of raised that point straight off the bat.
Yeah, amazing how families get involved, and like we said in the actual interview, families are a crucial part, especially I imagine for a 16-year-old living with a disability, and helping them to get their license in the first place. You know, parents are vital in that sequence of events for most drivers at 16-year-old, but I can imagine that there's a lot more support required, or maybe not. I don't know. I don't live with a disability per se like that. So yeah, it's interesting to hear him talk about it.
Yeah, it was really good. And the thing, I mean, I actually learned a fair bit there as well. I thought it was really interesting. All the different, like, I guess the how many prosthetics you need to keep getting as you're growing, and like that's going to be probably pretty challenging if you're on NDIS, and also maybe, you know, even challenging for an OT, even to sort of predict growth rates and things like that. Well, like, what do you think about that?
I think it comes a bit more back down to the prosthetics team for that type of thing. The OT's role would be more around helping the youth to get out and do the activities that they want to do, and trying to, as we heard from Daryl, we don't want OTs limiting people by saying you can't do this and you can't do that. But it's more about understanding the risk and presenting the risk, and then allowing them to take a calculated risk, and being aware that you've got to live life. We all take risks. We all you know, go down to where I am, down to Glenelg, and you see all the kids jumping off the jetty, or the pier if you're in New South Wales, but jumping off into the water, doing backflips and stuff. That's a calculated risk. You know, sometimes people don't do a calculated risk. They just are thrill seekers, and they want to put themselves in a dangerous situation to get adrenaline rush. And we don't want to take that away from people with disabilities as well. It's a really important part of people's lives to be able to make that choice, to be able to get that adrenaline rush, to be able to do things that are exciting and not limiting. And we want to be able to open up the world, not restrict the world as OTs.
Yeah. I think a lot of the stuff that he spoke about, particularly with all the different, I mean, honestly, I think it's one where if you're a therapist, particularly working with amputees, you probably could benefit from listening to this episode a couple of times, because the way he was explaining a lot of that stuff, that it was pretty technical, and I thought it was really good. Like, as in all the stuff around the sensory experience, the feedback. I mean, because I guess if I'm thinking, it would actually be very challenging for a therapist to be dealing with the amputee, because, like, I guess I learned a lot here in this one. In my mind, I didn't even think about all of those aspects. I was just thinking, yeah, prosthetic, this is probably one of the easier disabilities to deal with, but it seems like it's actually probably one of the more complex ones.
Well, like he said, you know, the mental mindset is the right leg doesn't work, in quoted inverted commas. The right leg doesn't work, so let's chuck it onto a left foot accelerator. And that's been the historical viewpoint. And it was so good to have him explain that, you know, there's so much more to it than that. You know, there's possibilities for the right leg to be utilized in driving, and being able to learn how to use that right limb can be all that's required, rather than trying to learn how to use your left leg or trying to learn a set of hand controls. It might be that we enhance the skills that you've already got in your right leg to be able to compensate for the prosthetic on the pedals. And like he said, all we need is a force on the pedals, and we need to be able to apply well, getting into physics now. My son's doing his physics exam today. We're getting into, and I've been testing him out on it all in regards to forces of equal to make things move and stuff like that. But that's all that's required on the pedal. We need a force on the pedal, and we need to be able to move the foot or the prosthetic from brake to accelerator quickly enough and be able to apply enough force and then appropriate force. And
Yeah.
if the person can demonstrate a possibility in that area, then maybe we can enhance it to be able to make it safe.
Yeah, yeah. And it was really good that he highlighted, because it's something that it's come up a little bit in some of the last interviews, is that you're using, well, I liked how he pointed out, I guess I didn't even think about it myself, was even an able-bodied driver is using multiple sensories, you know, it's using everything, not just their feet, right? So and yeah, I mean, that's really got to be understood when you're assessing somebody or working with them. It's not just looking at that, okay, well, here's this one thing missing, or here's this one thing that doesn't work, and let's just focus on that. It's the entire body that's functioning, the entire sensory experience. So it's yeah, it was really good that he kind of really pointed that out. So
I think it's what he really highlighted is that it's not that it doesn't work. It's just that it works in a different way.
Exactly.
And we're using other sensors and other feedback mechanisms to be able to make it work in a different way. And he's highlighting that with his stories of going through swamps and spotlighting and and things like that. It's those stories are why we ask that question, because we want to explore how people are using their license to live life and to get out and enjoy what Australia has to offer. We'll have an international guest at some point, I'm sure, and we'll talk about what it's like to drive overseas. But there's lots to explore around Australia with our license, that's for sure.
Yeah, and also I thought it was interesting what we were talking about with respect to the well, I guess the last couple of interviewees we've had seem to have come from these pre-NDIS days. And what's interesting is the old school seems to be a little bit more, I don't know if resilient is the right word, or like it just more like they just had to do it. So they seem to have figured out a way. Whereas now there seems to be like for example, this licensing question that we've been discussing and so on, it's starting to get pretty sensitive. Whereas, as he said, he didn't even have anything on his license, and this is a common story, right?
That's right.
So it's kind of, I don't know. I'm a bit. We've got to keep our tabs on it. I am a bit concerned that we might become a bit too soft. You know, because the old school way, they just had to figure it out, and they did. You know, so it's interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, there was a little tiny point there where he said he made his own leg. I wanted to ask more questions about that, but he made his own metal leg, and I imagine him, you know, sitting there on his farm welding something together to be able to he's got some imagination in his mind of what he's going to do with this leg. I just wanted to be in his head and figure out what he's going to use this metal leg that he's creating for himself at that time of his life. But yeah, I think that's it. I think, well, it's with society now as well, isn't it? We're all using phones where previously people were in sheds making stuff. It's maybe something to do with society nowadays as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not a bad or a good thing. It's just interesting that, yeah, back in the days, because I even saw somebody recently, I mean, it wasn't necessarily that great in terms of safety, but he had basically fabricated he had a Mercedes van, and he had fabricated all these really interesting hand controls and things that open doors and all these little things. He just made them all like with his mate in a workshop, and the hand controls were very, very questionable. but the thing is that I was sort of pushing him on it, but he turned around and said, "Look, I reckon because I've been doing this thing for the last 20 years, I reckon I'm probably safer than most people I'd be safer if you gave me a standard hand control, because I've been doing this way." So that sort of long-term adaptation is it's a very important aspect as well, and giving people that time under that controlled environment, which is also something that was mentioned there, that they do offer, you know, people to be able to drive in those controlled environments where it's not on the road and so on, to get that experience. I think that's, yeah, really important in trying to experience everything.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Congratulations to Amputees New South Wales, where they're putting on what appears to be a track day or go-karting or something along those lines, where people can get out and experiment. We say it every week: get out there and trial. So look, if you're wanting to experiment driving, get in contact with Daryl, and hopefully you can get out and have a trial with him, with the program that they're organising for people to give it a go. And I think that's what we've highlighted so much in this, is in a controlled environment, give it a go. And I think I made mention of it in the podcast, but OTs you can learn so much from your clients, and they really do have the lived experience, like Daryl was saying. Make sure that you give them the chance to have a go, even if it's to have a go to rule it out. At least then you know. Don't try to rule it out without actually having a go, because you as the OT might learn something, but also the client might learn something as well. And you made point of it, Ali, that this other gentleman that you know just felt way more at home with hand controls than with the left foot accelerator.
Yeah.
And people's brains adapt differently. People can use their right side of their brain better than their left side of the brain, or be able to control their upper limbs with more feeling and with more confidence than their lower limbs. And
also, in the long term, you might find, like, for example, we spoke, as we mentioned in this episode, with Khoa, how he uses his hips and moves his hips. Maybe in the long term, that might cause more damage on the hips as compared to, let's say, if he was using, you know, like a push pat or something, you know, something where it's a pretty easy thing to use on a hand control, you know, like an electronic hand control or something like that, or one of those, you know, glove ones, or whatever, like a fairly easy to use one. In the long term may actually be better for his body as well. So that's an interesting, I guess, thing to think about.
Maybe better for his body, Ellie, but knowing Khoa mentally, it's not gonna.
Well, him,
pain. Yeah, he wants to. Well, when the borders open back up again, he'll be in America driving some massive, you know, V8 car, or racing it around a track or whatever. For him mentally, he needs to be able to drive any car that he can get himself into, and being limited by hand controls in one car, that might be for later on in life. Not where.
And actually, that's actually a really good point when you said the mentally thing, because that was also the thing that Daryl kind of pointed out as well, how it is. It was great that he kind of pointed out that mental health aspect of it as well, because that is such a big aspect of anyone with any disability, really. Like I've mentioned it recently. It was a few months ago now. I broke my foot, and I was in a wheelchair for a couple of days, or a few days, when I went out in public, and yeah, really, you are like, the eyes are all glued to you. Like I was just in a wheelchair, you know what I mean, just being pushed around by my wife, and it wasn't even anything. I didn't think it was anything spectacular, but I was getting stares left, right, and center. People were uncomfortable, and I was just like, wow, this is pretty confronting. You know, it was really interesting.
Yeah. How is that comment that he made about the PTSD that's associated with the surgery, not the accident?
Yeah.
That the PTSD, that mental mind shift, that this is it, the limb's about to come off, or it has come off, and the PTSD related to the surgery, not actually slipping underneath a tractor, you know, a lawnmower. Unreal, really. How the body adapts to the point of confrontation.
Yeah, and I guess the one thing which we've had a few guests on as well, which show, like you can see with Daryl, he's doing quite well in life, and I think a lot of it would be contributed to all the sports that he does. You know, that's a you know, you're part of a community. You know, it's an instant. It's like what was it Liesel was talking about? You know, walking into there and just basically seeing everyone there. It's an instant community. You know, so people are doing things. People have got boyfriends, girlfriends, all that kind of stuff. So it's a big encouragement to be more engaged into that active kind of life. You know, and being living that life the best way you can.
Don't just trial driving, trial everything.
Try everything so you can get out there and experience those things. I don't think Daryl will be going to martial arts classes and things like that as often if he didn't have the ability to drive. So that's the whole point. He get out there, drive, and use the community. So it's really good.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want, like we've highlighted, we will put how to get in contact with Daryl through Amputees New South Wales in our show notes. So you can find that on the Drive Able podcast Facebook page. We're also on Instagram and we're also on YouTube. If you want to come and watch this episode and actually see Daryl's face, and he referenced the picture behind his head there where he was doing an obstacle race like Spartan or Tough Mudder or whichever one it was at that point. He's a super active guy. Amputees New South Wales do a lot to support people, not just in New South Wales, but across the country as well. There's other associations out there as well, Limbs for Life and other local support groups as well. So reaching out to these support groups allows you to see what other people are doing, see how they're living their life through lived experience, and that might be the bit that helps you overcome adversity. But if you want to try driving, get out there and try that as well.
Yeah. That's it. I guess we should wrap it up there.
Yeah.
And, we'll come back for another one, eh?
Yeah, well, see you in the next one. The next one's exciting too. I'm looking forward to that one. That'll be very, very interesting chat. I'm not going to give anything away, but taking a different viewpoint in the next chat will be very interesting. Yeah,
sounds good. We've got lots of good interviews coming up, so it's going to be good. All right, Brad, we'll see you next time.
See ya. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Drive Able podcast with Brad Williams and Ali Akbarian. If you like what you've heard, make sure you like, rate and subscribe. It really does make a massive difference. If you or anyone you know would like to share a story about driving with a disability, or you would like to get in contact, find the show notes, or find the resources mentioned in this episode, you can find us on Facebook. Just search @Drive Able Podcast for more information.